Let's welcome Mark Devlin and say thanks very much.
Cheers, Andy. Everyone that ever introduces me is called Andy for some reason. Evening, folks. Thanks for turning out tonight. I'm holding a mic because I'm a DJ and I feel at home with a mic in my hand, so it's a bit of a clumsy way of working, but it works for me, and I'll get through it somehow. This is actually only the third talk of this type that I've ever done, and the first one was in September last year in Riga, Latvia, and at the end of it, you could hear tumbleweed blowing across the plain, because the kids that were there just didn't understand it at all. And looking back on the content of that talk, compared with what I've got for you this evening, it was absolute beginner's kids stuff. I can look back at it now and just see how basic it was, because I didn't understand very much at all, even a year ago, about the sort of stuff that I'm talking about tonight. So, loads of new content in this one. And to cut a very long story short, just by way of a bit of background, I've been a DJ for the last 20 odd years, club and radio DJ. I've done gigs all over the UK in about 40 odd countries around the world, for various radio shows. I've been a music writer as well, used to write for Blues and Soul magazine, a few people might remember them. And I've been a lifelong music fan as well. And that is pretty much down to Sunday bath times back in the day. Sunday night bath times. My mum, who is here tonight, used to always give me a bath on a Sunday evening when the top 40 chart countdown was on the radio. And so I always used to absorb all the pop music of the day. And back when I was 5 years old, I got into Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody first time round. And I went out and bought the records when I was 5, saved up my money, and it was the first record I bought. So from that point on, I was always into pop music, whatever was in the charts, and I just had this idea that I really wanted to be a DJ. So, as I say, cut a long story short, bit of hustling, bit of hard work. Eventually in 1990, I got on the path to becoming a DJ. And for many years, I just went with the flow, and I did what's expected of you as a DJ, just played the tunes, played all the artists that were being presented to me by the record companies, and just existed in blissful ignorance, just going about my job like all my peers were, and not really giving it any thought as to whether there was a hidden hand involved. And in 2010, I underwent what I refer to as a conscious awakening. And that was when I came to the realization that the world and life is nothing like we've been conditioned all our lives to believe that it is. This was as a result of reading a lot of books by various different authors, not least the books of David Icke, which were very influential on me. My dad, who's also here tonight, was always into lots of different authors and subjects, and he encouraged me to be open-minded and think about things. And so in 2010, I came to this understanding that it's not governments that run the world. There's actually a cabal of elites, as they like to consider themselves, working through secret societies who are obsessed with the occult and engage in it on a regular basis. And over an immense period of time, going back thousands of years, they've come to control and infiltrate every area of daily human life. This realization coincided with other understandings about the nature of reality, the nature of life, who and what we are and how we fit into it. It's all part of a massive big picture. But as far as all this stuff goes, it was an understanding that this group of so-called elites have infiltrated and controlled governments, the banking system, the whole financial industry, educational establishments, schools, colleges, universities, all the big corporations, particularly the food and drink corporations, the military, the scientific establishment, And if you're a group of socio-psychopaths that are hell-bent on human control, and you don't have humanity's best interests at heart, it would be very remiss of you to have left out the entertainment industry, and particularly Hollywood movies, the television industry, and the music industry. Because if you're going for mind control of the masses and perception management and setting norms and acceptable ways of doing things, then you are going to need the entertainment industry on your side. And of course that's what's happened. The entertainment industry, and particularly the music industry, has been infiltrated and is controlled by a hidden hand behind the scenes. Most of what they do, they hide in plain sight. And so you can go through an entire human lifetime seeing all this stuff and not realising what it means and not interpreting it. And that's pretty much what they rely on. And it's only when you start to dig beneath the surface and start to understand some of the stuff that goes on in the background that it all falls into perspective. And so that's a process that I've been through over the last 3 years or so, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. In a nutshell, the mind control manipulations of the Illuminati music industry, for want of a better phrase. So the first thing that alerted me to what was going on, or the first thing that I was alerted to, was some of the symbolism and imagery that was starting to be routinely placed in music videos. And early on, I got put onto a website called Vigilant Citizen, vigilantcitizen.com. And the guy that runs it is a young researcher in Canada. And he goes into all the symbolism and imagery that you see in videos, TV shows, movies, promotional pictures, all that sort of thing, and breaks down what they're trying to present to you and what's really going on. And one of the classic videos for this of recent times was Rihanna's Umbrella, which was a #1 record in 2007. And in it, you get this image here, which appears on screen for a split second. So blink and you miss it. There's a researcher by the name of Lennon Honor out of the US, who I've interviewed for one of my podcasts, and he went into this in great detail. He first started analysing Rihanna's Umbrella video, and he was, as far as I know, the first researcher to identify this split-second image. It's aimed straight at the subliminal mind, which of course absorbs everything that the conscious mind is not aware of, and it lodges itself in there for later processing. And that's what they're aiming at with these split-second images. This, in the video, is supposed to be Rihanna bending down into a pose with her arms outstretched. That's supposed to be her head down there. But when you study the image in fine detail, you come to realise that it's anatomically impossible to strike this pose. Everything's out of proportion, and the image is being manipulated. And Lennon Honor has put forward the view that this is actually a depiction of a demonic entity. Some people might say Baphomet. We'll be going into Baphomet later. But certainly a demonic entity that is being evoked through this video. From the same video, another still, Rihanna inside a pyramid. Pyramids are going to feature a lot as well. But when we're talking about Illuminati imagery and the symbolism that this group of elites, this cabal, like to use, pyramids feature big time, as we'll see. And there's another place that we've seen pyramids quite recently, the Olympic Stadium. Last year, pyramids with illuminated capstones all the way around the stadium. But just a coincidence. Another pyramid, another video, and another majorly controlled artist, will.i.am. I've got another name for him, but I'll keep it polite. Shil.i.am is one of them, that's quite a polite one. Former frontman of the Black Eyed Peas, well he still is I think, but going back to the days when the Black Eyed Peas were good, when they made decent music, got to go back to about 1998 for that I think. These days, will.i.am is very much a pawn and a stooge and a puppet of the industry. His music changed big time a few years ago, and it's quite clear to see that he was being controlled. This is a still from The Britney Spears and will.i.am collaboration, Scream and Shout. You've got a monarch butterfly that he's pointing to with his finger there, and also another pyramid. And there'll be more on this video and butterflies as we progress. This one is Kanye West's Power video. And this video is notable for being just one continuous image. It starts off with the camera zoomed in fine detail on some of this stuff, and then as the video progresses, the camera zooms out and you get to see more and more of the detail. But there's all sorts of stuff going on here. It's all occult. It's all quite dark, really. Some quite disturbing stuff going on. It ends with Kanye about to be beheaded, with these two characters inside about to strike him down with the swords, and that's the point where the video ends. But I don't know about you, but I remember days when videos were fun. Just artists doing stuff that was relevant to the music, and they were good to look at, and they were fun, and they were glitzy and all of that. But I just noticed that videos now are very dark and very occultic and not what they used to be. And it seems to me like there's an agenda going on. Lady Gaga, lots to say about her as well. This has been identified as a reference to Saturn. The black cross there is a standard way of symbolising Saturn. Saturn related to Satanism. Satanism, the word comes from Saturn, from a veneration for the planet Saturn, according to many. And there'll be more on that as we progress as well. This is a still from a Jay-Z video, on to the next one, from a couple of years ago. Again, it's just a mishmash of all kinds of occultic imagery and dark stuff. And I often wondered how these video makers would justify the sort of stuff that they're putting into these music videos. Because with all things, there's a cover story, there's an official version of why something is the way it is. And I came across this quote from the guy that directed that video, onto the next one, a guy by the name of Sam Brown. And he's attempted a justification at why those images are in there. And he's talking about abstract imagery, videos can be enjoyed purely visually, it doesn't need to mean anything or make any sense. Conspiracy theory is another thing entirely. So he's not really saying anything there, but there's an attempt at a justification because there has to be a cover story. This is just more dark stuff, really. It's an image from a Lil Wayne record sleeve, and it's from his album called I Am Not a Human Being, which I think is quite a fitting title, really, when it comes to Lil Wayne. And it reminds me of Silence of the Lambs, because there was sort of cocoon butterfly imagery in that, and it was all pretty unsettling. And I just wonder why that would be on a Lil Wayne record entitled I'm Not a Human Being. And again, we have a cover story for this one. There's an attempt at an explanation as to why that image is there. The inspiration was the timelessness of Lil Wayne as an artist. The butterfly has many stages in life, represents longevity and reinvention. Okay, so seems a pretty weak-ass explanation to me, but at least they've tried. And moving on from music videos then, another thing which early on in my research I got put onto was the many hand signs and signals that you see many of your favourite artists giving off. And a classic character who you always see referenced in talks such as this is Jay-Z. You can't do a talk without mentioning him because he's a big-time player in the whole agenda. And coming to realise that Jay-Z is absolutely a controlled puppet and stooge of the music industry, and far from this rags to riches story of this drug dealer from Brooklyn that hustled really hard and made good and got a record deal and worked his way up the ladder and got corporations and did it all off his own back. You come to realise that Jay-Z's just been a stooge from the start, and he's been puppeteered by his masters, and he is the guy that's been chosen to be the #1 hip-hop artist for the last God knows how many years. That position was available, and Jay-Z has been manipulated into place. And he's played the game very well. He's done everything that's been expected of him, and he's danced to his master's tune. And part of that involves these hand signals that you see at Jay-Z concerts, that you see on promotional pictures, on record sleeves and such. The cover story is that it's the rock sign. They tell you, Jay-Z tells you, that it's a reference to, first of all, his record label, which was originally called Rockefeller Records. There's a name to conjure with. These days it's called Rock Nation. And the rock sign is supposed to be a diamond, a rock, a diamond. They're supposed to be celebrating bling culture, rags to riches. The guy made good, he's got money, we're celebrating life, it's a diamond sign, that's what they tell you. Here he is, this is David Rockefeller, head of the Rockefeller bloodline, the current head of that particular Illuminati family. He's a good-looking fella, isn't he? Yeah, they're really attractive sorts, these Illuminati types.
Die, you bastard, die!
Well, that's a thought.
We are going to have really graphic images, so you're just going to need to control yourselves. I know later there's a picture of Bono, so you're just going to have to be mature about this and let Mark just...
Hey, there's 10 pictures of Bono, mate. We're going in on Bono. But yeah, this guy's about 96 or something. They don't die, they just go on forever. Son of J.D. Rockefeller, the great, it says here, American industrialist and businessman and all the rest of it. But this is basically the guy who Jay-Z named his record company after. Why would he, you might think? But it's all about these Illuminati bloodline families when you come to look into it. So here's a Jay-Z concert, and this is what we see all the time. He will give the instruction to his fans to throw up your rocks, throw up your rock signs. And on instruction, of course, all the brainwashed crowd, not realising really what they're doing, throw up their hand signs in the form of what they think is a diamond or the rock sign. And actually, the symbol is in part a reference to the pyramid that we see on the dollar bill, which is the calling card of this cabal, of these elites, and has been for a very long time. They've put their calling card on the dollar bill, so you get the pyramid representing the power structure which they make up, and you have the capstone removed with the all-seeing eye in it, which is in part symbolising, well, some would say the Eye of Horus in Egyptian mythology, and also a reference to the pineal gland, the so-called third eye. And it also, the fact that the capstone is removed represents the hidden occultic knowledge that the elites like to try and keep for themselves, which is not for the likes of the rest of us. And so the rest of the pyramid represents the ignorant masses as they see them. So part of Jay-Z's rock sign is in reference to that. And we'll go on to the other bit shortly. But just an interesting aside that I wanted to put in here. Somebody alerted me to this old Duran Duran sleeve from back in the day, Union of the Snake, 1983, 30 years ago. Down the bottom there, you see an all-seeing eye. Who noticed that in 1983? And another old-school sleeve as well, which is absolutely packed with all this occultic symbolism. Earth, Wind and Fire. There's actually many Earth, Wind and Fire albums that go into all this symbology. But you've got bloody everything on here. Saturn. There's the Eye of Horus at the top. There's the Seal of Solomon / Star of David / Rothschild family symbol at the top there. An Egyptian ankh. All sorts of stuff going on there. Another pyramid. So here we have Jay-Z and his best mate Kanye West doing the old rock sign thing and looking very pleased with themselves. And another one. And that was Jay-Z yesterday. That's That's how Jay-Z looks now. That was him just on a random day yesterday. Okay, so here's the same hand signal, and it's an ancient symbol that goes back many thousands of years. And this one is being done by Anton Sandor LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan. And this was one of the favourite symbols that was used in the Church of Satan when they first got going in 1966, I think it was. So it's again a reference to that, and you come to realise that it's very far from a harmless depiction of a diamond, what these guys are doing. Why would this be? Another old school one, which people would have missed at the time, which has only come to light recently, Madonna. This is from Desperately Seeking Susan, the movie from 1985. We have a pyramid, again with the capstone removed. It's a bit dark there, but you've got the all-seeing eye in the middle of the pyramid as well on the back of her jacket. And Madonna, of course, is another big-time recruit into this whole industry cabal situation. This is Beyonce, Mrs. Jay-Z, and again, blink and you would have missed this one, but this was at, I think it was the Grammys of this year, February this year, the Grammys, or it could have been, no, it's Super Bowl halftime, sorry, it's the US Super Bowl halftime show, and she very quickly flashed up the so-called diamond rock sign to the crowd as the camera was panning across her. And people at the time said, oh, she was just shouting out her husband. It was just a reference to her husband's record label, The Rock. You know, that's all she was doing. There is a lot of denial when it comes to all this stuff. People don't want to see what's right in front of them, so there'll always be explanations and innocent excuses for what goes on. But when you see this sort of stuff happening time and time again, if you're approaching it with an open mind, you come to realise that there is something going on beyond what we're being told. Now this is Beyonce at the Grammys, which was shortly after the US Super Bowl halftime, and again the camera is panning around the people in the crowd, and it focuses on Beyonce very quickly, and her instinctive reaction was to throw up this hand sign, which researchers have identified as signalling 2 6s. You've got 2 6s going on, one's obviously in reverse, but 2 6 is part of the 666 whole number of the beast business. But you see that sign in quite a number of places as well. This is Jay-Z and Beyonce's baby, Blue Ivy Carter. And an interesting image that was knocked up by somebody on the internet there. More hand signals. This one is Azalea Banks doing the devil horns that you see a fair bit now as well. Another thing which you see so many times throughout the music industry is the covering of one eye or the highlighting of one eye, which again has been taken to be a reference to the all-seeing eye, the pineal gland, the all-seeing eye of the pyramid. Is Justin Bieber doing it, of all people? And a few years ago, you might have noticed that it became very fashionable and stylish for some reason for people to be photographed with one half of their face missing. And when these photographs first started coming out, I remember thinking that they just looked ridiculous. I couldn't understand why that was stylish in any way. It made no sense. But we're seeing this time and time again now with celebs and with music artists. They're photographed with just one side of their face in the frame. It's another way of depicting that all-seeing eye. Going way back, a young Michael Jackson doing the same hand signal as Beyonce, no doubt under instruction. Probably didn't know what he was doing, as he did most of his life. And here's a nice composite of Lady Gaga and Rihanna, two of the most useful assets of the music industry at this present time. They play the game, they do what they're told, they allow themselves to be puppeteered, and of course this has elevated them to the very top of their game. And people often say in this state of denial, because who likes to admit that their favourite artists are part of something much bigger than them? Who likes to admit that maybe their favourite artists aren't as creative and individual and independent as they thought they were, and actually they're being controlled and told what to do from powers above them? It was difficult for me with Jay-Z, because I've been a hip-hop DJ for 20 odd years, and I used to love Jay-Z, used to really respect him. I thought he was a very talented rapper. He still is, which is why he's been recruited, because that skill and that talent was recognised. But it was very difficult for me to come to terms with the obvious revelation that he was completely controlled. But I had to, because the evidence spoke for itself, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of all this imagery and all this evidence that we're seeing. And so people often say, oh, well, you know, I can see it with Jay-Z and Beyonce, they're obvious examples, but surely not such and such, you know, surely not Justin Bieber, surely not this A-list artist. And the point is, if they're an A-list artist, they're going to be controlled, because things have reached a point where you cannot get to the upper levels of the mainstream music industry unless you allow yourself to be completely and absolutely controlled by the powers that be. I don't believe this used to be the case up until a few years ago. I believe there was still room in the music industry for artists to be creative and expressive and to pretty much bring their own skills and talent to the table. But that's no longer the case. And so you see here pretty much every major A-list artist on any of the big corporation record labels covering the eye. This goes beyond the realms of coincidence. And a lot of people that you speak to, and often when you go on chat forums or you look at YouTube comments below videos on this sort of thing, people say, no, there's no conspiracy going on here, they're just trying to look cool. It's just a fashionable way to look cool, covering your eye. Maybe it once was. But when this number of artists are all doing the same thing, and we're supposed to believe that it's spontaneous, to me it's obvious evidence that it goes beyond coincidence. It's the same thing as presidents, US presidents. People often say, oh, well, such and such a president wasn't corrupt, was he? And the answer is, well, was he president? Yes, he was. Well, then he was corrupt, because it comes with the job. Last real president of the US died 50 years ago next month. This is a site which I've found very useful for research purposes. Just for reference, it's called Conspiromedia. I think the full address is conspiromedia.wordpress.com, but you'll find it in a search anyway. The guy that runs this, who I've interviewed for 2 of my podcasts, goes right into all the evidence of the hidden hand in the music industry, and he takes it way back as well. He takes it way back to the 60s and the 70s and the very early days, and goes into great detail with his research. Great site, thoroughly recommended. As is the work of this guy, Neil Sanders, author and researcher. He's put out 2 volumes of his book, Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own, and he goes into mind control of the masses, perception management, and all the rest of it. And he goes in big time on the music industry as well. So he's worth looking up. And Vigilant Citizen is the site which first put me on to all the video stuff. So that's been an invaluable one to me as well. So when I first came to understand all this stuff about what was going on with Jay-Z, Beyonce, and Rihanna, and Lady Gaga, and all the rest of them, in the early days, I did think that it was just a modern phenomenon, that the powers that be had decided to step up the game when it came to the music industry within the last few years. And so I spent a lot of time focusing on the current so-called hip-hop and so-called R&B artists of the day, because it ain't hip-hop and it ain't R&B, what these artists are putting out now, whatever else it is. But the more I looked into it, the more I came to understand that this infiltration of the music industry has been going on pretty much since day one, since the beginning of popular music. You can take it way back to the 1950s and trace the development of it onwards. There have certainly been periods where the activity has been stepped up to quite a noticeable degree, but all this strange stuff and all this corruption has been going on pretty much since the start. The reason I've got this Elvis Presley slide up here is because somebody put me onto this recently. It's a newspaper account of him and some young female fans, but it mentions Priscilla Presley, who at the time was Priscilla Beaulieu, who was apparently just 14 years of age when she met Elvis in September 1959. And there's strong speculation that the relationship was sexual from the start. And so Elvis, having a sexual relationship with a 14-year-old, makes him a paedophile, one of the early ones. It's just something to think about in terms of the way certain artists are presented to you. The public image is often very different to what's going on behind the scenes. And so we get on to the Beatles. And there's a few strange and unusual things about the Beatles. The sleeve of their classic album, Sgt. Pepper, features an array of characters who at the time the Beatles described as our heroes. They said, these are the people that have inspired us, they're our heroes. And lurking in the back there, we have Aleister Crowley, who was described as the 20th century's most wicked man, I think. He was known as the Great Beast, 666, the founder of the Thelema religious organisation, and a well-known Satanist, best-known Satanist of the last century. What's Aleister Crowley doing on the Beatles album? Very strange. Not the last time you hear of Crowley in influencing the music business. Again, going way back to one of these original Beatles sleeves, you see the group with half their face shaded and just one eye in view. Very similar to the sort of imagery we're seeing these days. Who would have noticed this at the time or thought anything of it? But when you look back in retrospect, armed with the knowledge we now have, there could have been something going on here as well in terms of control. Another image of the Beatles from Yellow Submarine, a couple of interesting hand signs going on, again very similar to what we've seen in recent times. Paul McCartney doing the old 6 sign, and Lennon doing this hand sign, which we'll also revisit shortly. So yeah, we'll reference that as we go on, but a couple of interesting things going on there. Here's Crowley again, with his famous hat and a pyramid going on there. What a coincidence. And Aleister Crowley's famous phrase, which went hand in hand with his Thelema religious belief system, was, do what thou wilt. Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. And if you go on Crowley's Wikipedia page, it will tell you that do what thou wilt is a reference to being a free spirit and following your spirit's destiny rather than being tied down by belief systems and society and stuff like that. That's not what I've heard from other quarters looking into what Crowley was all about. Most researchers that have looked into Thelema will tell you that do what thou wilt means basically do whatever you want without any regard whatsoever for anyone else or the effect that this might have on humanity. Basically just follow your own path, follow your own ego, succumb to your ego's desires, and that's what Crowley and his belief system was all about. And so isn't it interesting that we see Jay-Z wearing a sweatshirt with do what thou wilt on? It's another reference to Crowley in the music business. So he's transcending the generations here, and his influence is being felt. What has Aleister Crowley got to do with the music industry? It makes no sense. So there's the quote, do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. Staying with Crowley, he owned this house, Boleskine House, I believe it's pronounced, on the shores of Loch Ness in Scotland, and Crowley owned it from 1899 to 1913. And it's said that he purchased this house in order to perform the operation found in the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abra Melin the Mage. Crowley is known for going to Egypt and locking himself up in a building close to the pyramids, and through his wife channeling a spirit which is said to be that of Horus. And he apparently bought this house in Scotland to try and reenact that and bring through this spirit again. And the character that you see here is Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, who was apparently obsessed with the work of Crowley, and so he bought this house. And he lived there from the early 70s to 1991. And I've heard an account that this house was originally built on the site of a church which burned to the ground with the congregation inside. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but as I say, I've heard the story and it's something worth considering. But anyway, Jimmy Page, big Crowley fan, and that's why he bought the house. Staying with all the strange stuff from decades past, we're still in the 60s, and this is the Beatles, and this is the famous Paul is dead conspiracy theory. Again, I don't know whether this is true or not, but a lot of people seem to go for this seemingly wild theory that Paul McCartney actually died in 1966 and was replaced by a double. It sounds ridiculous when you first hear it, but I mention it only to reflect the fact that there was all this kind of strange, odd stuff going on in the music industry back then. The theory goes, which was hatched by a bunch of American students in 1969, apparently, that on the sleeve of the Abbey Road album, the Beatles are giving you visual clues to the fact that Paul is actually dead. And it's supposed to be that from the way they're dressed, John is supposed to represent a priest, I think. Ringo is supposed to be an undertaker. George is supposed to be a gravedigger. And the theory goes that Paul is walking out of step with the others, but he isn't there. So I don't know what's going on with that one. And the theory is that Paul McCartney went off one day from the recording studio in his car in 1966 and was involved in a car accident and died, and the Beatles swiftly replaced him with a double, who conveniently was able to sing and write songs and perform just like him. So that was a stroke of luck. But you then get images such as this, and people say this is not the same person. And from these two images, the nose is certainly different. So
his new song is called Don't Look at Me. All my life, I never knew what I could do.
Well, there you go, telling you what's going on. So certainly from these two images, it does look like his nose is different. He could have had a nose job, but I don't know. Conspiracy theories are nothing new, particularly in the music game. And then, of course, most people have probably heard of this idea that the Beatles track Helter Skelter inspired the Manson murders, Charles Manson and family, to commit those horrific murders in California in 1969, Sharon Tate and co. That's been debunked by many researchers who've said that Helter Skelter is just a diversion tactic, and then other researchers that you speak to will say, no, there were hidden subliminal messages in the Beatles track Helter Skelter, which Manson and co were able to pick up on, and it instructed them to carry out these murders. So it all goes to show that it's not all about Rihanna and Lady Gaga and Jay-Z. All this stuff goes way back when you look into it. Now this guy is Admiral George Stephen Morrison, and he's the father of Jim Morrison of The Doors. And it turns out that this guy was US Naval Commander during the two Gulf of Tonkin incidents, which catapulted America into the Vietnam War. He just happened to be Naval Commander at the time. And at least one of those two events has been confirmed as a fake, a hoax. It never happened the way it was originally put forward. So it's a classic false flag, it's a classic problem, reaction, solution. Because it never actually happened, it's sort of no problem, reaction, solution. But how interesting that the Admiral at the time just turned out to be the father of Jim Morrison of the Doors. And this leads into the whole business of Laurel Canyon, which is not a person, but a place in California. And it was a place where many of the influential musicians of the mid to late 60s, kind of hippie era, counterculture, anti-establishment so-called music, went to live and make music and hang out together. And a surprising number of the artists that you see cropping up at that period just happened to have moved to Laurel Canyon at this time. Jim Morrison of the Doors, there's Frank Zappa, there was the Mamas and Papas involved, Joan Baez, Donovan, loads of others. And a lot of researchers are of the view that Laurel Canyon was actually used as a kind of experimental testing ground for mind control subjects in the music industry, musicians that had undergone some sort of mind control programs. And when you look into the family background of so many of these musicians, you realise that almost without exception, they come from families with military backgrounds, military industrial complex, or they're connected to the government or the CIA in some way, the way Jim Morrison's family was. And again, to me, this goes beyond the realms of coincidence, and it seems as if something is going on here. So something else which I got put onto very early on when I started researching all of this was the issue of predictive programming in movies, TV shows, and music videos. And this is where images, again, usually split second, straight into the subliminal mind, are implanted into popular culture vehicles for no apparent reason. And then shortly afterwards, an event happens, false flag or a problem reaction solution event, and it's as if the placing of the image in the video or the film was foreshadowing what was to come. And a classic example of that was this reference to Sandy Hook, which appeared in the Batman Dark Knight Rises movie of a couple of years ago. And of course, a few months after that, we had the Sandy Hook school massacre, or not, as the case may be. But this reference would appear to have no place in the narrative of this movie, and yet it's there. And isn't it strange what came to happen afterwards? And going back a few years, when you start looking at this stuff, you find multiple references to 9/11, which happened long before the event of 2001. I'm not sure which movie this is from, but there are many. There's videos on YouTube that go on for minutes and minutes and minutes, just giving you images from movies that have foreshadowed 9/11. This one gives you 9/11/01. They've even got the year. All very strange. This is the ID card of Neo from the Matrix movie. The movie came out in 1999, and on his ID card you see that the expiry date is listed as the 11th of September 2001. What a coincidence. And then we get on to some record sleeves. J. Rue the Damager is an underground hip-hop artist who's very much respected and revered by real hip-hop heads. Now, I'm of the view that J. Rue never sold out. He never sold his soul in the way that the likes of Jay-Z did, and in my view, he's still a bona fide real hip-hop artist. And so it's my view that this sleeve was put together without his knowledge or without his endorsement by the record company. It came out in, I think it was 1993, it's about 93, 94. It's called The Sun Rises in the East, and in it you can see it depicts one of the twin towers of the World Trade Center going up in flames, just like 9/11. This one is going back to 1980. It's an album by Supertramp, Breakfast in America. So we have the Twin Towers being depicted there with the Supertramp logo at the top. But when you reverse the image, an interesting thing happens. You see above the buildings, the letters turn into 9/11 directly above the Twin Towers. And that was in 1980. They do tend to plan quite well in advance, these Illuminati types. This is a mad one. A group called The Coup, and this was called Party Music. And this sleeve was originally put together in June 2001, so just a few months before 9/11. And the original album sleeve was never released because, of course, the events of 9/11 ensued, and there's no way this could have been put out since. But of course, the image still exists. And I think I've got a quote from one of the musicians on this. No, I did have a quote from him. But one of the guys from the group was attempting to justify how this came about and the extraordinary coincidence of this sleeve depicting what then happened in September 2001. Interesting track listing on it. There's a track called 5 Million Ways to Kill a CEO, which is a pretty good one. So eventually the artwork to this album was changed, and the album was released in November of 2001 with a completely different image. But that one is pretty chilling, really. And this is a sleeve of Michael Jackson's Blood on the Dance Floor. And we're going back to 1997 for this one. And to me, in the background, those buildings look very much like the Manhattan skyline of New York. And you can see it's all crumbling to dust. And Michael is dancing around on a Masonic checkerboard floor with the black and white squares symbolising light and dark, good and evil, night and day, and all the other polarities that are symbolised by the Masonic checkerboard. And of course, Michael Jackson could do a whole bloody talk on Michael Jackson himself and the many strange aspects of his career and what may have been going on with him. So that's something for another talk, but lots to say there. Another amazing coincidence is the fact that Jay-Z's Blueprint album, the original Blueprint album, just happens to have been released, as you'll see at the top there, on September the 11th, 2001. Of all the dates, that was the original release date for Jay-Z's album. Who would have guessed? On the subject of predictive programming, as I say, it's not limited just to movies and TV shows and even record sleeves, but music videos as well. This is a classic recent example of a music video depicting something which a short while later came into reality, or apparent reality, according to the cover story. This is Lil Wayne's My Home Is Still video, and there's a shot in it where he's dancing around in a movie theatre surrounded by 12 skeletons. And this video came out a few days, I think, before the Aurora, Colorado theatre massacre, when 12 people just happened to be killed by a mad gunman, or two gunmen, according to which story you listen to. But either way, this goes beyond the realms of coincidence for me. Many people don't want to go there. Many people will write it off and say it's just one of those things, but it's pretty clear to me that whoever put this video together had some prior knowledge of what was going on. And Lil Wayne probably didn't even know what bloody planet he was on. I thought I'd include a lyric from this particular track because, as I said earlier, what used to be hip-hop ain't hip-hop anymore. There's lots of ways to describe it, and there's lots of things you can call it, but it sure ain't hip-hop. This is the sort of thing that's being passed off as hip-hop these days, and these are the sort of lyrics that kids are listening to and which are being presented as where it's at. This is cool, this is great, this is what you need to be getting down to and reciting to your homies and, you know, listening to. You know, the lyrics speak for themselves, I don't need to repeat them, but interesting line there, I've got to put that patch over my third eye. That's quite revealing. And then we have the hook line, don't make my goons go stupid, go stupid, go stupid. Don't make my goons go stupid, go stupid, go stupid. And the go stupid bit, I think, is intended as an instruction to the people that listen to this. Because you have kids going around reciting these lyrics, and this is where we're at. That was from 2012, but it hasn't got any better. Okay. We'll take a break shortly, but before that, something else to get into is the subject of backmasking, also known sometimes as subliminal messaging. Most people have probably heard about this concept. The idea is if you play a particular piece of recorded music backwards, you know, like you do, you get messages that you can't hear when it's played forwards. And these messages are apparently picked up on by the subconscious subliminal mind, and they're absorbed and stored for later processing. This was a big thing in rock music, particularly in the 1970s. There were stories of the likes of Led Zeppelin, and going back to the 60s, the Beatles, and Black Sabbath. No great surprise there, being involved in all this sort of stuff. But the most famous case of it was with Judas Priest. And this actually went to court in the US in 1990. The band were involved in a civil action alleging that they were responsible for the shooting of two youths, 20-year-old James Vance, 18-year-old Raymond Belknap in Nevada. The story goes that these two young guys were listening to Judas Priest's 1978 Stained Class album, and in the song Better By You, Better By Me, when played backwards, not quite sure how they managed it, they must have been reversing the record on the turntable, but it apparently includes the phrase, do it, do it. And the prosecution in this case alleged that having absorbed the phrase, do it, from this Judas Priest record, these two young guys interpreted that as, you must kill yourselves. And so they went out and shot themselves. One of them died straight away, the other one died later on from his gunshot wounds. And eventually the case was thrown out. It's thrown out of court. But it did bring into the public consciousness the idea that backmasking exists in music and that it's placed there deliberately. And I've got a personal anecdote about this, which I'll just share with you. My first proper job in the music industry was working in a radio station in Oxford called Fox FM. And I started in 1990, and basically I used to make the tea and clean the toilets and do all the dog's body stuff. And I used to pretty much live there, because I was in the studio at weekends and late at night, and I was just hanging out doing stuff and getting to know how to operate tape, reels of tape and that sort of thing. And I remember hearing on a TV show, I think it was The Word on Channel 4, there was a feature about Madonna's Justify My Love, which had just come out at the time. And this feature was going into backmasking, and it claimed that somebody had realised that if you play Justify My Love by Madonna backwards, you hear the phrase, hear us, love us, Satan. And this sparked my curiosity, and being young and foolish, I thought, oh, I must give that a go and see if it works. So, as I say, I used to work with reels of tape long before computer hard disks. Everything was done on tape. So I recorded this track onto a reel of tape, and I reversed the tapes, put backwards on the machine, and played them. And this was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was just me and the on-air presenter in the building, just this guy doing the show. And so I pressed the play button, and a chill went down my spine, because it really did sound as if you were hearing Hear Us, Love Us, Satan. And so I was bricking myself, and I thought, oh my God, I've got I've got to share this with the presenter, you know, the only other guy in the building. So I went next door and I said, mate, you've got to come and listen to this, what I've discovered is, this is outrageous. And so he came in the other studio, and I went to play the tape, and there was nothing on it. It had completely disappeared. There was no logical explanation for it. The recording had just disappeared from the tape. I hadn't done anything to wipe it. It was there 1 minute, gone the next. So, a strange story there. And that's probably the first thing that sparked my curiosity about the whole business of strange stuff in the music industry. Another famous example of backmasking is Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. It's alleged that if you play a section of that backwards, you hear the phrase, "Oh, here's to my sweet Satan, the one whose little path would make me sad, whose power is Satan." And this is at the point where, when you play the track forwards, you hear the lyric, "If there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alarmed now, it's just a sprinkling for the May Queen." And when you listen to it forwards, the way Robert Plant sings it, he does say it in a strange way. He says, it's just a sprinkling for the May Queen. Whereas a natural way to say it would be, it's just a sprinkling. But he says a. And this is the phrase where, when you play it backwards, it's supposed to say, "Oh, here's to my sweet Satan." I've tried it, and it does sound as if that's going on. The recording did actually survive this time. And I suppose people would say there's an element of you hear what you want to hear. So if you expect to hear it, you strain and you kind of make yourself believe that you've heard that phrase. But this example is actually on Led Zeppelin's Wikipedia page. And they mention the fact that this is a common theory. And they also give you a little snippet of the audio, forwards and backwards. So if you want to check it out for yourselves, go on Led Zeppelin's Wikipedia page, and you can play the reverse section yourself and see what you think. But, of course, the accusation is that these music makers are deliberately encoding their music with messages which only make sense to the subliminal mind when heard in reverse. I can't say whether it's true or not, but for me, it's something worth pondering. And just a bit of a disclaimer, really, when talking about Satanism. I've made a couple of references to Satanism. I'm not coming at the issue of Satanism from any religious viewpoint. Obviously, many people's perception of what Satanism is all about is the worship of the devil, this character known as Satan, known sometimes as Lucifer. From everything that I've come to understand from my research into many different areas over the last 3 years, Satanism is all about the manipulation of energy and conjuring up dark energy and negative energetic situations. I've come to understand that everything is made up of energy, vibrating and resonating at different frequencies, and different scenarios and situations manifest into reality according to the vibrational frequency. And what the elites, the cabal that control the music industry and control everything else in life like to do with their satanic rituals is conjure up low density, very negative, very dark, energetic situations where very malevolent, unpleasant things take place. So that's my understanding of what Satanism actually is. And these elites are obsessed with it, and they feel the need to perform rituals in all kinds of manners all the time. And also, as I say, Saturn, to me, is involved. I think this might be a good point to take a break. There's a fair bit more, but I think maybe we'll take a break for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so, and then come back and do the rest.
Shall we say that?